We have had a busy and successful day as part of the Fulbright Commission's meeting here on the Pitzer College campus, and I want to thank everyone who has been involved in putting together the meeting all day today as well as this evening's event. A very, very special thank you to Nigel Boyle for organizing this with all of our wonderful students. And now I'd like to introduce Tom Healy, who is chair of the Fulbright Commission.
So when Angel swooped into a philosophy seminar and the students were gathered around, and the angel went to the one student who was talking, and she stopped talking, and the angel said to her, "You get 3 wishes. You can have wisdom, beauty, or $10 million. And she immediately chose wisdom. There was a stroke of lightning, and she was transformed, and when it all settled down, the philosophy student looked heartbroken. And one of the other students said after a long time, there's an awkward silence, "Say something." "I should have taken the $10 million. So I say that just because the great thing about the Fulbright program is it's an opportunity to do both things. It's the opportunity to take the gift of a grant for education and a chance to have an experience of lifelong wisdom and engagement with the world. You know that here at the Claremont Colleges and certainly at Pitzer, and we've come really in some ways for our board meeting to learn how you do it. It's so impressive, and that's what tonight's panel is going to be about all the experiences of your alumni who've been Fulbright scholars around the world. Just to quickly say, the Fulbright board is appointed by the president, and we oversee this program that's almost in 200 countries, and in one form or another, Fulbright's about 10,000 people a year on various Fulbright programs. So it's a real privilege to meet Fulbright scholars wherever they are, in the hills above Kathmandu or in the lecture halls at Pitzer College. And there are 4 words that I've heard thousands of times since I've been on this board. People say over and over again, and it's Fulbright changed my life. I've heard it from 87-year-old retired people, and I've heard it from 22-year-olds just out of school. So if you have a chance to apply for a Fulbright, if you think of a project and opportunity to go abroad and engage in the world, we hope you will. Tonight you're going to learn some of the ways that people have done that and what their stories have been. I want to just briefly, before we get to the main event, introduce someone very important to us who is my boss, but that is Assistant Secretary of State Evan Ryan, who just joined us from 100 other events in Los Angeles. But the Assistant Secretary oversees all of the efforts at education and cultural exchange that the U.S. Department of State has throughout the world. So Fulbright is a cornerstone of that effort, but there are all sorts of things, and she had one of her own great experiences in this kind of diplomacy through sports. So she's going to come up and do a hacky sack demonstration and then answer your questions. But no, I'd actually love to introduce you to our newest person in the Fulbright program, our leader, the Assistant Secretary of State, Evan Ryan.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here at Pitzer because you are the leaders in the Fulbright's achievements. So I'm so glad to be able to be with you here today. It's my first trip since becoming Assistant Secretary 7 weeks ago. So this is my first foray outside of the State Department. So it's only appropriate, I think, that it be a Pitzer. And I just wanted to thank President Trombley for this gracious hosting of the Fulbright Board. We're really honored to be with you. And since arriving at the State Department, I've had the opportunity to talk with various and diverse audiences at the State Department about the transformative, life-changing experiences they've had through an exchange program. And the exchanges can have a huge impact both for the participants and for the host families and people who then engage with the exchange participants. The cross-cultural understanding and lifelong relationships that result are exactly what Senator Fulbright had in mind when he conceived the Fulbright program. And I just wanted to say that Ann Kerr Adams is an exemplary torchbearer for mutual understanding in that vein. After spending a year in Lebanon, as an undergraduate student at Occidental College, she was propelled into becoming a true global citizen. Her experiences since in Lebanon, Egypt, the United Kingdom, and in many other countries have contributed to her truly global education and experience. We're very fortunate that Ann's international interests, expertise, and worldview led her to the Fulbright family. For more than 2 decades, she has organized educational and cultural enrichment activities for visiting Fulbright scholars in Southern California, expanding their Fulbright experience and enabling them to better understand and appreciate America and everyone in America. And what you do, and the special way in which you do it, makes a world of difference. And as a small token of our deep appreciation for your work, I am pleased to present you with the U.S. Department of State Certificate of Appreciation.
Pitzer for hosting us, and President Laura for being the newest member of
Yes.
Yes. So we can be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you again. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here, and I don't want to hold up your panel. I don't want to turn this back over to Tom, but it was really an honor to be with you all today. Thank you, Pitzer.
Actually, I'm done speaking entirely. We're going to turn it over to Nigel, whom most of you know who are here at Pitzer. But for the people we have on around the world, Nigel Boyle is the Director of Global and Local Programs here at Pitzer College and is one of the architects of this great success of international engagement and going to lead us in this panel discussion. So thank you, Nigel.
Thank you, Tom. So, is my Madonna mic working here? You can all hear me? Okay. So, welcome to everybody here, to the live audience here, but also to the audience around the country and around the world. This is being live streamed, and so I've had many emails from people who are going to be checking into what we're doing here this evening. I'd like to make a special welcome to 3 constituencies who are represented here in the live audience and I hope online as well. Firstly, my fellow Fulbright Program advisors. We've got a gathering of Southern California Fulbright Program advisors here and others, I think, tuning in from elsewhere. And we are the folks who are especially keen to broaden engagement, to broaden and deepen the pool of Fulbright applicants. And so we're very invested in how we go about this. The second constituency represented here, and hopefully around the country, that I'd like to greet are what I'll call the curious juniors. Junior students who are interested in what this Fulbright thing is, and given our title this evening, wondering where in the world a Fulbright might take them. So that's the second constituency. The third constituency I'll call the nervous seniors. These are students here and elsewhere who've applied for a Fulbright, and they're now starting to wonder, well, if I get one of these damn things, where in the world is it going to take me, and what is it going to do to me? How is it going to change my head, my heart, and my career? And so it's with that in mind that we've formed this this panel of 5 Pitzer alumni who've won Fulbrights. And what we've asked them to do, very briefly, it's meant to be interactive, and so this is largely going to be Q&A, but they will very briefly talk about what it was that motivated them to apply for Fulbright in the first place. This is a very diverse group of people in terms of their interests, where they went and so forth, but a common denominator among them is that as juniors, applying for Fulbright was not necessarily on their radar screen. They are not necessarily the high probability applicants, and yet they did apply for Fulbright. They won a Fulbright, and so I want them to talk on the one hand about what it was that motivated them to this. The second thing we want to them to talk about is, and Tom referenced this a second ago, is just how the experience changed them. What winning a Fulbright, what completing a Fulbright has done to them, and the effect that it's had on them. So what I'll do very briefly now is to introduce each of these folks and do the sort of hop, skip, and a jump, what they did here at Pitzer, where they went, and what they're doing these days, and then I'll let them sort of fill in the gaps of why they applied for a Fulbright and what it meant for them. And when we were first forming this panel, the State Department people were asking us, can you get some Fulbright winners who are kind of older, further along in their career? And we had to explain to them, well, I think Ben Ball is about as old as we get around here. So Ben Ball actually graduated at the end of the last century, if you can believe that.
Turn of the century.
But Ben Ball is a kid from Northern California whose first international experience, I discovered yesterday, was when his professors, Alan Jones and Lourdes Arguelles, took him down to Tijuana in his freshman seminar, where they watched various people hop the border, apparently cheering them on, and then speculating about whether the Pitzer bus should be used to help some of these people across the border. These days, Ben Ball is a senior policy advisor at the Department of Homeland Security, and he's in...
So now I protect our nation's borders, ironically enough. Yes.
Responsible for the visa waiver program. So but the connecting dots here is study abroad in Turkey, Fulbright in Turkey. Ben actually got a hat trick of fellowships. So he got a Rotary to Turkey and a Luce to South Korea. Then to the Fletcher School, into the Foreign Service. We had a very interesting career and an interesting interaction with Al-Qaeda in Jeddah at one point, before moving to his current position in the Department of Homeland Security. That's Ben Ball. I'll next introduce Paul Kim. Paul Kim spent 5 years in the US Navy before coming to college, and he has the medals to prove it, his experience there. Pitzer has a particularly wonderful program, the New Resources Program, for non-traditional age students to come and get a college education at a liberal arts college. Paul came in as such a student. He used his undergraduate career in part to interrogate the foreign policy that he was at the service of during his Navy career, graduated in International Intercultural Studies, won a Fulbright to go to Thailand, teaching in Thailand. He has remained in Thailand, working for a leading Thai NGO on social and economic development projects among the hill tribes in Thailand. And he's actually the operational director for a coffee project right now. So that's Paul Kim. I'll next introduce Lexi Spencer-Nantobartolo. Lexi was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, the child of a single mother who was a casino worker, right?
Yes.
But she came to Pitzer, got a NATO internship in Brussels, then went and got a research Fulbright to Georgia, where she studied the possibility of Georgian entry into NATO. She got out of Georgia a few weeks before the Russian tanks moved in.
After.
Oh, was it after? Oh, excuse me,
yeah.
Sorry. She left after the tanks moved in. And these NATO experiences obviously led in a very sort of linear fashion to, firstly, a great job working with the Screen Actors Guild, and now to a position as a screenwriter in Hollywood, a quite successful one. So, and I'll leave her to connect the dots there, because that doesn't make too much sense to me. Next, I'd like to introduce Janice Cho. Janice came to Pitzer as a bilingual Korean English speaker, laser focused on her path to medical medical school. Along the way, she went to Nepal and Ecuador and learned Nepali and Spanish and graduated in Spanish and human biology. She then won a research Fulbright to Belgium to study the genetics of yeast, and beer lovers will appreciate that yeast is very important in Leuven in Belgium. But anyway, but lab scientist who won a Fulbright and has publications out of that. And in the next few days, she'll be making a decision between whether she goes to medical school at Wake Forest University or Georgetown University, and perhaps we can put that to a vote at the end of the evening. But anyway, and lastly, I'd like to introduce Mauricio Pantoja, who was actually born in Mexico, but raised in the city of Pomona, just down the road. Mauricio developed a precocious interest in labor market economics as a teenager, in part because he worked as a day laborer as a teenager. He came to Pitzer, continued his interest, among other things, graduated with a degree in economics, and then won a Fulbright to the business program in Mexico, where he interned in and studied Mexican banking. He has returned to the US and is now into graduate school at the Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University, which is a wonderful place to go to graduate school because it's where I went to graduate school. But nonetheless, so these are our panelists this evening, and they've each got a great story to tell, and so we'll turn to each of them in turn to say a few words, and then hopefully we'll get some question and answer from the live audience, but I understand there'll also be questions coming in from the live stream audience as well. So Ben, would you, as the old man of the team, would you mind taking us away?
Sure. So I guess you could consider me a slightly nervous junior when I started looking into the Fulbright, and when I approached my advisor, Tom Elgin, who's here tonight. Thank you for being here, and also Nigel himself. And I started thinking about that terrible catch-22 that every undergraduate faces when they graduate from college, which is you need experience to get a job, but how do you get that experience if you don't have it? And the Fulbright for me was really the perfect solution, or at least I conceived of it in my mind as the perfect solution to get the experience that I needed to then move on in my career, or at least establish a career of some sort. I hadn't really thought it through much more than that, to be honest. I didn't know where it was going to lead me. I didn't know how it was going to change me. I had been on the Pitzer program in Turkey, a program which unfortunately no longer exists, but so I knew sort of what I was getting into, and I knew the culture that I was getting into, but I had just had, in a way, kind of a surface level interaction with it. I had lived for a semester in a little village just an hour outside of Ankara. I farmed sugar beets with a lovely family, and I went to a Turkish university for a semester. But then when I got there, I found that there were so many more layers of Turkey that I had never even encountered, even in that whole semester living in a little village and going to school there, because I had a much more sort of long-term relationship with people and with the culture. And I started to sort of add new layers onto my understanding of what Turkey was. And then after that, it really sort of set me on this pathway that ended up with me joining the Foreign Service, getting the rest of my hat trick of fellowships, and serving 3 tours in the Foreign Service, and now I'm with the Department of Homeland Security, where I work still on international issues, and I work on how people move from one country to another. And so I would say that all the seeds of those things were laid in my Fulbright, because I started to develop a sense of what it was like to be a person in the world in a way that I had never been able to do before. I had this sort of umbilical cord when I was there with the Pitzer Turkey program, but the Fulbright very definitively cut that umbilical cord. I was suddenly on my own, even though there was a shadow network of people who were supporting me, behind the scenes. I was still there very much on my own, and I was there experiencing Turkish culture and Turkish life on my own. And for me, it was the perfect introduction to a career that eventually led back into the U.S. government.
Okay. Paul, let's go next.
my experience with Fulbright program. It's a little tricky to talk about it because I almost did not apply until I talked with Professor Boyle here because I wasn't sure. It wasn't because I came to college with experience, much longer experience than my college years. So it wasn't that, and I was almost searching for something different because I mean, during my time in the service, also before that, I mean, several jobs. I've done a lot of things before, but I was very much interested in work of development, and I'm sure both of my advisors are here, Professor Laco and Iljan. I was very much interested in development work, but I wasn't sure how to get involved. The first thing that came into my mind was education. I felt like that was the sort of the initial step in any type of development. So I was considering at the time whether I should apply for a grad school program or a Fulbright, and I'm glad I applied for Fulbright because education is not my thing. I was like, there's no way I was able to do that. I learned a lot. I mean, as a Fulbright scholar, I went there as an ETA, thinking that there's going to be a teaching assistant, so I would be paired up with another teacher there, and doing all kinds of teaching assignments. And yet I was mostly babysitting because I had no idea what I was doing. They dropped me in the classroom the first day I got there. Hey, here, teach. You're a teacher, so you're supposed to teach. And I was like, I don't speak the language. They don't understand English. I mean, mind you, they placed me in the middle of countryside, Khon Kaen province, which is the northeastern part of Thailand. And for the initial month, as soon as I got to Thailand, they put us into a dormitory at the university there, taught us the language, culture, and everything. But they didn't tell us that the place we were being sent was a rural part, also have their own dialect and have their own culture. So this was going to another totally different culture, actually country, and they speak their own dialect. So I was really lost. But then the students really helped me out. So my initial thinking was, I'm there to teach them, I'm there to help them, and yet now that I think about it, they helped me more. They taught me more about who I am as a person now, and also how to live in a very difficult situation like that. Because they have absolutely no idea what it's like in the world, and yet they're happy. But the tricky part about development, I was talking with Professor Laco again earlier, was the fact that we always, go to the different countries or any kind of development, we engage in it with this mindset that we're there to help people, and yet we always forget that we're there to help them to help themselves, and that was the key. And I think this Fulbright program really taught me that it's not about me going there to help them, but it's for me to initially unlock that potential and tell them that no, you have the power to change yourself, and that's what I learned from this Fulbright program.
So as Nigel mentioned, I have the least linear path of anyone on this stage. When I came to college, I was the first person in my family to go to school. I was what you'd call like a casino brat because I was born in Atlantic City. I grew up in Southern Nevada, and then my mom started working in the tribal casinos out here in Southern California. So it was by no means expected that I was even going to go to school. So for me, going to college, I think I came in with what I think a lot of students do, which is this sense that intellectually, like, I shouldn't be here. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, my roommate has professor parents. Like, she understands this environment. But very quickly, in an environment like Pitzer, you get the sort of support that you need to start asking, well, okay, why not? Like, I want to do this thing. I want to research this thing. I want to write this paper. For me, I was a debater here, so someone said, well, you can get grant money to go and travel while you do this. And I was like, oh, okay, that's easy. So I can do that. And I would start doing those things. And then before you knew it, I had applied for a State Department internship with the U.S. mission to NATO in Brussels, Belgium. And coming off of that, basically came back the first part of my senior year and said, hey, Nigel, I'm going to apply for a Fulbright to Georgia. Don't worry, it'll work out. Bye. And sort of entered the Fulbright process with that kind of surety. Like, that was the sort of arc I had in college. And my Fulbright, I was in the Republic of Georgia from 2007 to 2008. And at that time, I was fairly confident that I was going to be a professor, that I was going to do this, then I was going to go right to grad school, and it was a very straight line from this to that. And not only was I in Georgia for, as some of you may know, one of the most exciting periods in their recent history in terms of engagement with Russia and botched parliamentary elections and just a whole host of things, but also for the 2008 primary season, which was it was interesting because I never really had a lot of interest, quite frankly, in domestic politics. So you're watching it from abroad, like Hillary and Barack and all these things, and it's so exciting, and every Georgian wants to talk to you about this, but it makes you step back and say, what is interesting to me here? Like I honestly didn't watch any of the primary debates because I was A, very far away, and B, we had Russian tanks amassing on the borders. There were other things to sort of be paying attention to at the time. So for me, Fulbright provided this really amazing chance to step back and say, who am I in this world? What do I want to be doing? How do I want to be spending my time and the talents and resources that I have to achieve the things that I think I can and what I think can contribute most to the general populace, which sounds very heady and is a very sort of liberal arts thing to say, but it's true. Ultimately, it's a question of how you use your time. So while I was in Georgia, my project was looking at the way that the Georgian public was being educated about NATO membership, and specifically the accession process. So all the reforms that you have to make for your military and the way that your government functions in order to get membership into NATO, which is hard for me to understand as a college graduate. And you're asking someone who barely can provide for their family to understand that process too, which didn't mentally make sense to me. So being able to then talk to people and say, what does this mean to you? How did you learn this? Was very engaging. Now, I had anticipated I'd get to work with the military and talk to those people, but the second week I was in country, they had parliamentary elections that were not deemed to be suitable, and it was a giant mess. So no one wanted to talk to me about my project. Absolutely no one wanted to talk about NATO, no one wanted to talk about the EU, no one wanted to talk about anything. So I had to really think on my feet about how I was going to get the kinds of interviews and the kinds of feedback I needed to make my project happen. So it forced me to go an end around and talk to cultural organizations and informal networks like soccer supporters clubs and fan bases for big bands in Georgia, and these sort of non-structural organizations where people would meet, gather, and then talk about what was going on. So ultimately, real life happened to my Fulbright, and it made my Fulbright experience so much richer and so much more engaging and surprising than I had really thought it was going to be. And I did not end up a professor, but the ability to think and pivot has served me well throughout. And I don't think I would have really understood what that meant until I was on a Fulbright in that situation. So that was my Fulbright.
Do you want to say anything about screenwriting?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's one of those things where it's something that you enjoy and something that you do, and it doesn't always have to be the main thing in your life. So I'd always written, and I had, continued writing when I was a student here without sort of any sort of formal training. And then after I left Georgia, I worked in the field for President Obama's 2008 campaign. They sent me to Florida. That was my 2008. And then I ended up in DC as a lobbyist for the AFL-CIO. And all through this period of time, I'm working in domestic politics, thinking this is what I need to be doing, this is the way that I'm going to engage. And my main portfolio was the Affordable Care Act. So I was lobbying on health care and young worker issues and debt forgiveness and loan restructuring, all of those things that we all wish were, where they should be. So ultimately, I burned out. That's the way to capsulize it. It just got too much. So the ability to look at those events and say, well, this isn't what I thought it was, and then look at things like when the Colbert Report or the Daily Show would come on Capitol Hill and the effect that would have in generating conversation among staffers really taught me the power of the media and led me to really pursue that more strongly. So I sold a couple of things offhand and now get to do that full time. So.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
Janice?
So I came to Pitzer. Having grown up in a Korean household, my parents don't speak English. And so I came here not having ever gone abroad. And I remember freshman year, there was a flyer in the mailroom advertising for a summer program in Nepal for freshmen. And I remember the words anthropological research, which I didn't know what that meant, because I came into Pitzer as a pre-med student. I knew I wanted to go into medicine, I want to say junior year of high school. And I spent most of my time over at Joint Science. And I saw this flyer in the mailroom and applied. And I was one of 6 chosen to go on a research trip to Nepal. And I think that pretty much launched me on a path of being abroad for the last 5 years. And so in Nepal, I was with the host family. I was talking to different students about the political change that was happening with the fall of the monarchy, and I found that really fascinating and something that I'd never done before. So I came back to Pitzer for my sophomore year, worked really hard to get my pre-med requirements completed, and junior year I went to Ecuador, stayed with the host family, really developed a passion for the Spanish language and Latin American culture. And I remember being in Ecuador, and it was my last month, and I got an email from the Office of Study Abroad saying there was an opening for an exchange in Spain. So immediately I went about trying to get that going. So I applied for a visa in Ecuador for Spain and found myself in Spain for my second semester. And I don't know, I think study abroad pretty much liberated me from science, which I love. But I think I was just so focused and driven, and being abroad kind of opened me to a different world. And I came back to Pitzer and immediately thought, how can I go abroad again? So it wasn't a really difficult decision. It wasn't something that I thought about applying to prior to coming back to Pitzer. But I decided to, I knew I didn't want to go to med school straight out of undergrad, and so I applied to various research positions. I had worked in labs before. I actually had accepted a job offer at the NIH to do research, and I also applied for a Fulbright at the same time. And so Nigel helped me and various other people to decide between the 2 offers that I had. And I actually had spent a summer in Washington State doing research at UW. And I remembered reading a paper about research that was going on in Belgium. And my boss in Washington collaborated with someone in Belgium, so it was sort of pretty much set for me. And I spent 2011 to 2012 doing a lab-based science research project abroad, working with yeast cells and seeing how genetic mutations in yeast have a phenotypic effect. So I had a great time. I spent this past year applying to med schools, and I'm currently interviewing, and I want to say all of my interviewers have asked me about the Fulbright. The first thing they ask me when I come into the room is, Fulbrights, those are hard to get. Tell me about it. So definitely life-changing in that aspect. As for my future, I'm going to be working with patients from all different walks of life. And I think the Fulbright and my past experiences have definitely prepared me to be sensitive to different cultural issues that can't be taught in the classroom. And I fully intend to also take advantage of all study abroad opportunities in med school. And I definitely look at the Office of Global Health brochures at each institution I go to. And it's something that I feel very privileged to have had the opportunity to experience. And so I would say go for it, take advantage of any opportunity you have to go abroad, because for me that's pretty much something that I did and something that really changed the way I look at different people and how I interact with individuals and strangers.
Thanks. Mauricio?
So, as Nigel mentioned, I was born in Mexico. I came to the U.S. when I was 3-4 years old. come senior year, 2008, I hear back from Fulbright and say, oh, you won a grant to go to Mexico. I was ecstatic. I called my parents, my mother who's here, and I told her, hey mom, I'm going to Mexico for a year to basically study at an MBA school and also work for a local bank. And she, her reaction was like, what? We crossed the border. Now you want to go back to Mexico in search of an opportunity? Well, yeah, you have to go where the opportunity calls. So that was my experience my senior year. But I like to say that my motivation or my path towards a Fulbright actually started my first day at Pitzer. I grew up locally. I went to a high school that, without giving too much detail, wasn't the best. We had our issues with gangs and drugs and whatnot. And so I was fortunate to do well in school and get accepted here at Pitzer, even though it was through the wait list. I'm still upset about that. I got accepted. I was like, yeah, Pitzer. They were offering me good scholarships. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to Pitzer for sure. But here I am, first day of class, Fletcher Hall. I'm in a really nice room. My high school didn't have anything like it. I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. 20 of my peers. I was the only Latino there, so quick culture shock there. I was like, oh wow. Everybody sounds so smart. Everybody's asking questions. The professor's talking about the role that language plays in politics. In my head, that doesn't really compute. Like, what does that have to do with anything? And so I was a little intimidated, stood quiet. And when class ended, I went back to my room. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of upset a little bit. I was kind of frustrated because I felt a little unprepared. And so I was like, if I want to be a successful student here at Pitzer, I have to work twice as hard. I have to kind of, hustle and be that student that I want to be. And so my definition of a successful student, and this evolved throughout my 4 years at Pitzer, but it essentially became go to school, do well, study, get the good grades, also become part of the community, participate in local clubs. I joined the student senate, I joined the investment committee, volunteer at a local detention center for incarcerated youth. And then come senior year, everywhere you saw Fulbright, it's marketed here, marketed there. And so it's like, hey, you know what? I think that earning a Fulbright is, to some degree, it's self-validation that you've become a great student, that you've been molded in such a way that you can make your school proud. And that's because I still believe this, that the Fulbright grant encompasses a lot of the educational principles that Pitzer tries to emphasize. And those are social responsibility and appreciation for diversity, just mutual respect among communities across the world. And so that motivated me to apply. Like, yes, if I get a Fulbright, I'm going to make Pitzer proud. And that's going to tell me that I've become a successful Pitzer student. I ended up applying, went to Mexico, and frankly, I had one of the best experiences I've had so far. As I interacted with the local population, including my coworkers, random people while playing soccer, I realized that at a fundamental level, despite our differences in, culture, religion, language, or what have you, at the fundamental level, we as people want similar things, and that's, to be able to provide for our families, to be able to obtain an education. And that really got in my academic interest. And I decided to do public policy and then education at Duke in hopes that, someday I might be able to make a positive contribution to my community by expanding educational opportunities for students like myself who come from underserved communities.
Okay, thanks. So you've heard from our 5 panelists now, so we'd like to sort of open it up for questions from the live audience, from the online audience. So I'll moderate this. So would anyone like to start us off? You can direct it at an individual participant here, or throw something up for a scramble for any of them to take on. But would anyone like to start us off? Yes, please.
Yeah, I would like to ask all of you, which is first of all, it's fantastic to hear your comments and your live, and that's one of the nice things about Fulbright. As a member of the board, I'm very, which gives me great pleasure to be in this court, to be listening to all of you. So maybe this to all of you, and maybe what did Pitzer give you as a university that you think makes this place special? Vis-a-vis Fulbright and your experience.
Just for the online audience, I'll repeat the question. So the question is to any of the panelists, what was it about Pitzer that was distinctive and set them on this path? Would anyone like to take that?
I think Pitzer, one of the sort of core values that I think we've all touched on really is that it's all about experiential learning. And that when all of us went abroad on Pitzer programs, it's not that we were spending time in a dorm in another university that happened to be in another country. We were there with people experiencing their lives. And that's what really creates a connection between you and another country on a much more fundamental level. So for me, at least, that's how Pitzer really prepared me. And I think right now, that's why Pitzer's been so successful in the Fulbright arena in terms of getting more Fulbrights, is because we are trained here at Pitzer to experience the world in a certain way, in a very hands-on sort of way. And that's exactly what the Fulbright aims to do as well.
I would also say that Pitzer does an extremely good job of teaching students and enfranchising students to ask questions. Because ultimately, the most successful Pitzer students are the ones that are able to ask for guidance or help, or they know how to formulate a question. And at every point in your education here, it's reinforced that that's a thing you should do. So when you're in the middle of the wilderness in Nepal, or when you're like me and you have a host family with an incredibly conservative father in Italy telling you that the fact that you have The Economist means that you're a communist, you know how to engage with this situation in a way that's true story. True story. You know how to engage in a way that's constructive, that you can ask, okay, I am hearing you, like, why that? Like, why this? Why is this thing giving you that reaction? And you can enter into a situation in a way that is open, like you project that because you're willing to learn.
And also, I think Pitzer really lets you personalize your education. And as a science major and wanting to go to medical school, I have a set of requirements that I have to fulfill. And Pitzer's general education requirements are really flexible. So that allowed me to pick up a second major in Spanish, spend a year abroad, my entire junior year abroad, which most science students, let alone pre-med students, get to do. And I pretty much thank Pitzer for letting me do that, because had I had strict classes that I needed to take, I don't think I would have had the time to go abroad. And in interacting with people from other institutions, they haven't had the same experience and the support system to really have individuals saying, you should definitely take advantage of these opportunities. And the fact that Pitzer acknowledges the value of going abroad and not only studying abroad in the traditional sense, but really staying with host families, immersing yourself in cultures, getting the language down, I think that makes for, I want to say, an ideal candidate for the Fulbright to already have the level of intercultural sensitivity and understanding before you enter into any cultural situation. So.
I don't know, the sense that I got here at Pitzer about the culture is that it's cool to be part of the community, to participate in clubs, to be engaged, to want to go abroad and study and explore your options, and learn from different people from those differences. And so it's okay, it's fine to go abroad and just interact and explore and become part of other communities and learn from that experience.
Okay, just for the record too, it's nice for a Pitzer panel to be asked what's distinctive and special about Pitzer, but just to note that the Claremont colleges, our sister colleges, Scripps, Pomona, and CMC, and there's some folks from those colleges here, also have phenomenal records in Fulbright, so different student cultures can lead to very successful outcomes here as well. So is there another question that anyone likes to, yes?
How did you decide where you want to go? Because I'm a very eager sophomore.
So again, the question is how you made your decision on where to apply for a Fulbright. So, Paul?
Okay, well, I decided Thailand because it was only a logical choice because I did my research, my thesis, particularly about Southeast Asia, and one of the case studies I've done was in a project I've done while I was studying abroad in Thailand. So that was a branch out, and that's sort of what led me to sort of apply to the Fulbright of Thailand.
I think it's a combination of two factors, for me at least. I'm no gambling expert, but you do kind of have to play the odds to a certain extent, and you have to do your homework on the Fulbright itself. It's easier to get Fulbrights in some countries than others. So you have to look at your list of countries and figure out where is it more likely that I would get a Fulbright. So that's sort of the very sort of nuts and bolts version of it. But in the other reason, it's also kind of like picking a stock. Different countries are going to be of interest to you or to the world in different ways. And you have to sort of look at these countries and think, where is this country going? If I sort of attach myself to this country, where is that country going to go? And I invested in sort of, the Google of the world, which is Turkey, which is, always going somewhere different. And it's, constantly rising in the world, not necessarily getting anywhere, but it's always, becoming something. So I feel like I made an excellent decision in that sense. So, part of it is sort of where you want to go, and part of it is where is the country going to go?
For me, I actually let my project take me to the country. So I had the summer internship at the University of Washington. I remembered reading a paper from Belgium and thinking, this is definitely something that I would like to continue. And I did explore other options. So I wanted to go to Korea because I still haven't been, but I will go in March. And I thought about teaching English there. I thought I wanted to go to a Latin American country to use my Spanish. But ultimately, I contacted my affiliate at the University of Leuven in Belgium, and he was really excited, really supportive throughout the entire process. He read over my application multiple times. He wrote me a phenomenal recommendation letter, and so I just knew that Belgium was going to be the country that I was going to fulfill a project that I was really interested in. And Belgian culture is fascinating. They speak 3 languages, Dutch, French, and German. I learned Dutch, interesting language. I also really love learning languages and had a lot of fun. And so I guess for me, I also felt really overwhelmed with the number of choices that were available, and I'm not really good at making certain decisions, especially when it comes to choosing which country to go to next. But I want to say my experience in Belgium was phenomenal. I had an amazing lab with scientists from all over the world. So
2 reasons. First, I wanted to reconnect with my cultural roots, and so Mexico provided that opportunity. But second, at the time I was interested in finance, economics, and Mexico was the only program, aside from Spain, but Spain was for graduate students. But Mexico provided a binational business grant to be able to work for a bank and take MBA courses. And so, it just kind of fit in perfectly with my interests.
I appreciate what you were doing at this point because I did something similar. And I knew that I wanted to work in a country in transition, someone like a state that was going from one system to another or undergoing some sort of democratic transformation, because that was a lot of what I had studied. And I'd done a lot of research on the EU and the process of the creation of the EU. And then I had received the State Department internship to the U.S. mission to NATO in Brussels. And it happened to sort of coalesce because I was working on the accession portfolio, which are all these different countries that are trying to get into NATO and all these things that they had to do. So I actually ended up shrinking my list down to a few countries that were either interested or already members of the European Union, and then also were in the process of joining NATO. So it narrowed it for me. And then it was just a matter of like, well, there's Ukraine, there's, Georgia, which has got great food and awesome wine. And like the sort of lifestyle components were like very attractive. But also, ironically, at the time, it was the most stable option. It was, they had already gone through their transition, so I'd be going to a place where my data would sort of be constant. That was not the case. But again, a lot of it is sort of what Ben's talking about, where you're weighing different measures. Like, does it fit with the interests that you have research-wise, or as an ETA, the kind of things you'd be doing? And what's the likelihood of your ability to get that? What does it look like programmatically? Like, what's the requirement? Different countries have different things they require at the end of your Fulbright. So it's just sort of weighing those things and finding out what also appeals to you.
Add one more thing is also it would be a good idea to sort of decide what you want to do, whether an ETA program or a research, because that'll really decide which country you will most be likely to get accepted to.
So I hope at least one of those 5 answers will help you narrow down your short list of 30. But they're at the back.
Hi. First of all, thank you for sharing your Fulbright experience. I represent several of the demographic groups that you forgot to mention, the curious freshman. And so I was just wondering, you guys have been telling us a lot about your experiences, but what's like one single most challenging aspect about the Fulbright that you experienced, whether it be through your application process or a specific thing that you experienced inside your time abroad?
You mentioned the tanks.
Surprisingly, that's the most straightforward way you can confront something on a Fulbright. For me, the thing that was the moment I realized I am no longer in a comfort zone. I don't know what I'm doing, which is how I felt when I came to college. So I'd already experienced that, so it kind of had dulled it a little bit for me. Georgia has a very rich history with winemaking. They argue that that's where wine originated from, and we had been doing all of this. I actually lived with the other people on Fulbrights. We rented a house together, basically, because it was just easier than doing a lot of other things. And we had all been so stressed out. It had been really taxing. I had been an election monitor for essentially 6 months. Like, they'd had several rounds of voting, so I was just exhausted. My roommate was teaching in a school. My other roommate was doing peace building through theater. Like, we were spent. So we were like, we're gonna go to the wine region. This will be great. We're gonna see this beautiful part of the country, and it'll be super easy and super relaxing. And then we get there, and we should have known this, but there wasn't any infrastructure to go see these places. Like, they're like people's houses, and then they have these amazing grapes that grow, and then they make wine, and then it goes places. And there are wineries, but they're very far away. So we essentially cornered a taxi, maybe just a guy with a car who said he was a taxi, and then drove around a neighborhood, and he would stop, and basically people would sell us their wine that they made themselves. And we're hacking our way through Georgian, which I spoke pretty well, which is a completely different language than Russian or English. It's its own root. It has its own alphabet. My roommate was pretty good with Russian, and we were sort of just making it work. And there was a moment when we're in a guy's basement. He has an underground pot. There's a term for it, but of wine that is waiting from that year's harvest, and he's scooping it out into a water bottle to give to us, and he won't take any money. At that moment, I 100% realized this is insanity. And that gentleman who gave us that wine, I am friends with him on Facebook. And I still, I see pictures of his kids. It's those moments where it's like, this is crazy and wonderful and amazing, and you don't know if you should cry or scream or laugh at what's going on. And you just kind of accept it. And that was an amazing moment in my life.
I confronted a very different educational system in Turkey. Turkish universities are not like Pitzer. There is no Turkish Pitzer. And I faced this, they're very theoretical over in Turkey, just in general, and they're very sort of steeped in this. They never talk about exactly what they're going to talk about. They talk about it on this sort of 3 levels up sort of thing. So my most difficult moment, I would say, on the Fulbright is I was at Bill Kent University, and I ended up writing sort of a master's thesis and turned my Fulbright project into a master's thesis. And I was describing what I was going to write about, which is why leftist political parties in Turkey fail. Like why their electoral strategy is no good. So I was describing this to one of my colleagues, and she says, "Oh, very positivist." And I did not know what that word meant. I had no clue. And I was like, yes, absolutely. That's total. I'm a very positivist person. That's just who I am. And then later on, I had to go back and look at the dictionary and figure out what in the world she was talking about. But that was just sort of symptomatic of a larger issue in that they were coming at their educations from just a very different place. Ataturk was another problem for me. First president of Turkey, he looms large in everybody's life there. Math is taught as, 1 Ataturk plus 2 Ataturks equals 3 Ataturks. It gets to that level. So all of these people were coming from that sort of perspective, which was very alien to me. There is no sort of big leader in American education. George Washington is there, but then we talk about what he didn't do also. So I had a lot of catching up to do, actually. I had to read Ataturk's 6-day speech to Parliament just to figure out what he was all about. But those are those sort of learning moments, and that's why you go on a Fulbright, is to learn about other people's perspective and to try and come at your education from a different way.
For me, it was being Korean American and being abroad. The level of diversity that we have here in Los Angeles is unparalleled. And not everyone, mostly everyone, they don't really quite understand what diversity is. And especially in Belgium, different racial groups exist, but they're extremely separate. And there's no real integration or sort of what you would call fusion culture that we have here. And so being abroad for me, I never felt so aware of my racial identity. And even in a place like Belgium, certain people didn't really believe that I was American. And sort of, I got the age-old question, where are you really from? And so to constantly have to explain that was extremely difficult for me, but I was talking with another Fulbright grantee, Misa, who's sitting in the audience, and she is also Japanese. She's Japanese American, went to South Korea and faced exactly the same issues that I had. And we were talking, and she was saying that really, if we didn't face this issue, these people would go about not knowing what diversity was and how the U.S. is in terms of diversity. And so as difficult as it was for me, I'm grateful to have shared a certain level of insight with these individuals. And a lot of Belgians have this preconceived notion about what Americans are like. And that's partly our doing, because we export great media to different countries, especially our lovely reality shows that do really well for us. And I remember being in the lunchroom one day, and a certain individual said, "Hey, Americans are really bad with geography." And so I had a geography battle off, and we got to Africa, and I stumped the Belgian. And he said, "No joke, you are an exception, but most Americans are idiots." And so, to deal with that on, I want to say, a day-to-day basis was difficult. And I had another French roommate who I had explained to her that I was born in Los Angeles, and she said, "When did you get to Los Angeles?" So to have that was interesting, but now I'm comfortable with who I am and explaining where I come from.
So I was in Mexico in 2009 when H1N1 hit. So there's definitely some health risks that you have to consider. But for me, that wasn't really quite as frustrating. And instead, it was. So I worked at a bank, and I was part of, I interacted with traders who, at the press of a button, they could send hundreds of thousands of dollars around the world and make money. And one day I started walking home. I take the metro and I see a young family, from Mayan descent, and poor, just begging for money. And for me, just that level of disparity in the country just became very frustrating, because you want to do something, but you really can't do much because you're not in a position to create any, the change that you want to see. And so it was just getting used to those differences that for me was, took time and brought some frustrations along the way. But you get to live with that, and hopefully someday you'll be in a position to be able to enact some change in that regard.
For me, most difficult part was working with children. While I was in college, I always told everyone, I hate kids, what am I doing? I just never gonna have kids. And the first day I walk in, there's 40 kids looking at me. Oh, it's like, hello, I'm American. It's like, everybody give you that look. It's like, why are you American? You should be speaking Thai. And everybody would just laugh every time I would say something, like, hi. They would laugh. And my name is Paul. They would laugh, because it was like an Asian guy speaking English to them. So. And that was very difficult. The second most difficult part was every village that I visit, somebody would always try to give their daughters to me, and that was really weird. It's just like, why are you doing this to me? Hello, I just met you, but it's like they would set up like a dinner table with me and this other girl. It's like, okay, so it's already been prearranged by other teachers. It's like, okay, and they love doing that because it's a rural part. So those two things I just couldn't accept. And I still laugh about it. Yeah. So.
I think we have a question from the online audience. Yes.
Yes, we do. We have several questions, but one is from Thomas Capuano, who writes, for those who take on a Fulbright without prior language study in the host country, what are the challenges of such an undertaking? And to what extent can one realistically hope to acclimate in the host country without such knowledge?
So Georgia, they speak Russian, they speak Georgian, however, and there is a strategic language grant that is available to students studying in that region to learn Russian. I didn't know that when I had applied, so I didn't apply for it. One of my roommates did get it, though. So in tandem with her study, I just kind of jumped in and studied. I set up my study schedule the same way she set up hers. I just had to do it in tandem with my research. So it was good to have someone modeling it pragmatically. I wish I'd had more time, obviously. But ultimately, the trick, at least from where I was that you can speak Russian, you can speak English. It is better to speak Georgian because you earn more trust. There's a lot of value people place on your willingness to engage and learn a language that ultimately only 5 million people in the world speak. It has its own alphabet. It has its own root, so it's not going to help you learn anything else. So the fact that you're committing to it really conveys a lot. And it's a huge part of the culture, understanding the way the language works says a lot about the way that the culture works and the way that people view things and relationships and, even gender dichotomies. It's very, in that instance, it was very important to me that I be able to at least ask basic questions and have an intro salvo in the language that most people would be speaking. And beyond that, much like I think several people have mentioned, there are dialects to that. So if you're going to a small village, be prepared that that's not even going to be an option. But in my experience, it was the effort that was really the most important, the idea that I could write basic things and I could say things. And by the time I left, I was pretty good at it. I wasn't fluent by any means, but I was able to, write letters and I was able to, have conversations that were more than just surface. So I think the effort was a big part of it, at least where I was in my experience.
I speak Spanish.
Right.
I found that Turkey is a really expensive country when you don't speak Turkish. because you have to bargain for a lot of things. And when you go in bargaining in another language, you're very much behind the curve. And you end up sometimes paying double for things. When you come in Turkish, you're going to pay the normal price for things. Turkish is a very difficult language for English language speakers to learn. And unlike a lot of other languages, it's not... you can't learn Turkish gradually. You learn it in steps. So you get really frustrated for about 2 months where you're trying to match up the grammar that's very difficult and the vocabulary. And then you wake up one day and you have it. You're at one step. And then you get frustrated for another 2 months. And so I was sort of in that first step when I got there. So I was able to do sort of basic conversation, but the Fulbright Commission actually set me up with additional language study there. So I was able to make several additional steps after several months of frustration and get to the point where I could go to a vegetable market and get the real price. So I had a very pragmatic reason for learning the language.
Belgians are great at English. I want to say Dutch-speaking Belgians are infinitely better. And for me, the lab I was in, it's an international lab. Our PI made us all speak English, and no Dutch was allowed. Though by the end of my stay, that was not so enforced as much. But for me, like I said, I really loved learning languages, so I signed up for a Dutch course. Unfortunately, I couldn't complete it because I just got so consumed by my project. But I actually found it quite necessary, especially in going to the supermarket and really figuring out different cuts of meat, and especially trying to avoid horse. I definitely know the Dutch word for horse. Also, Belgians really do appreciate it if you make an effort to learn the language, especially Dutch, because not many people know how to speak it. And Dutch is actually the language that's most closely tied to English, though the over-excessive use of consonants would not allow you to see that clearly. But I pretty much had an easy time with learning, or with having people speak English around me. It was actually the pressure that I put on myself to acquire fluency in Dutch that kind of put me at, I guess, a disadvantageous spot, or so I thought, in not being fluent in Dutch, but I would say it wasn't a problem at all.
Well, for me also, definitely learning the language is important. But right now, especially in my current job, we deal with several different groups of hill tribe groups. And, it's at least 7 different languages. And newest edition is Burmese, so it's really difficult trying to keep track of all that. But while I was in my Fulbright program, they spoke the dialect, which they call it Lao, or Laotian, that we call it, and because it's the same people back in the day. So I had trouble, communicating people in Bangkok who spoke Central Thai, but when I went to Laos and spoke to Laotians, in Vientiane, for example, I had much easier time. So that was a totally different country. So it really depends on which area you're at too. I had a better time when I was visiting Laos than Bangkok, even though it was the same country. So in that sense, I think learning the language is also very important. Also understanding who your neighbors are, from a smaller scale to even bigger scale. I think it's really helpful.
And on that note, in some places, particularly in big cities, there's a lot of people that speak English. So that's all help to some degree.
Yeah. I think we have time for perhaps one more question. So would anyone like the last question?
Another one from the live stream audience.
Sure.
This is from Dimitri Duxy. What is one thing that you would change about your Fulbright experience which would better impact where you are today?
Tricky.
Make it 12 months instead of 10.
I wish that I had taken a bigger risk and gone to somewhere further afield. I was in Ankara, the capital. If I had been in Van, which is down by the Iranian border, or Trabzon, or one of these other places, I would have been forced to immerse myself in Turkish culture and Turkish society in a whole other way. So I wish I had done that.
I think I was so nervous about getting the Fulbright that I didn't even think about applying for like a multi-country one. Because once I got in the region, I was like, oh, well, clearly there's connectivity between my research and what's going on in Armenia and in Azerbaijan and like all these neighboring countries. But I was so fixated on, I have this one project in this one place and it will go well, that once you get there and you see that there's all this whole world that connects to what you're interested in, your view expands.
For me, I had this brilliant idea of taking the medical college admission test internationally. So I took like 13 inches of books abroad. I was questioned about it at the airport. Why do you have so much luggage? And I took the underwater train to London to take this test, which was a terrible idea. And I actually came back and had to retake the test, but I would not do that ever again. So don't take the GREs or whatever test you're studying for abroad. Truly enjoy the process, which I did after I took the test. And so, yeah.
For me, I wish I had set more of a realistic expectations about, again, and goals as well. I think I went in thinking that I could do more than I could really handle. And by doing that, I wish I couldn't develop a deeper connection with my students. And I think that's one thing that I wish I had known beforehand. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've had about 90 minutes of really interesting conversation. My thanks to the online audience for sending us some questions and paying attention, and to you all here. But please join me in thanking our 5 panelists here tonight. Thank you.